What's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be taking a look at Tim Burton's 1988 Beetlejuice and why I think it's a special film. One of the best things this film does is it throws away the traditional blueprints of a film that would release during this time. In a way, it almost flips the typical flow of movies on its head because it's almost like Barbara and Adam go from becoming the heroes to the villains by being the ghastly apparitions that try and haunt the deets. Within the first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, the protagonists are dead, and it's clever enough that it knows killing off the protagonists subverts the expectations of the audience, because what normal movie would be ballsy and audacious enough to do something like that? And you add in the fact that their lives clung to a dog's weight just speaks volumes of how goofy and silly this movie is trying to be, but also it tells how low the chances are of them surviving the incident if they are banking on a dog to not move. I just always really enjoyed how Burton's choice of having them float between life and death depended on something so random as a dog. Like, what are the odds that the dog would be there in the first place, you know? And I think it's so funny that so much of this movie is about real estate. Like, the deets moving in right after the previous owners had literally just died is so dark. But also the Maitlands essentially hiring an exorcist to get back their property. Like, it's not subtle at all, but I also don't really hear too many people talking about that aspect of the movie. But in general, what a fun and creative twist to the type of movie that had come prior to this, or even during this era of movies. Like, it's even more astonishing that this movie came out in 1988, and most of those movies that were coming out during this time were just sequels, and studios were just churning out a whole bunch of unoriginal content. It proved that you can have a supernatural comedy with a dark edge that, for reference, those later Nightmare movies just weren't able to capture, even with countless attempts. Hell, we're talking about the movie where the villain is trying to marry a child, but it's presented in a way that's just comically goofy. I think this bizarre film, with its wacky nature, works really well because it really shouldn't, and yet it feels right. The contradictions, like the titular Beetlejuice having the least amount of screen time, even though this character is the one you'd expect to have the most amount of screen time, or the fact that the movie can't even decide how to actually spell the word Beetlejuice. Also, like the smart characters sometimes making questionable decisions, or the dumb characters making sometimes smart decisions. Like, I think it's hilarious that the deets, when they find out that there's actual ghosts in this house, instead of running away, which is what you would think would be the normal plan of action, they try to profit off of it instead. Like, that's just such funny and strange behavior that in a movie as morbidly dark as this, it works. Hell, the funniest bit of the entire movie is that the Maitlands are too lazy to actually read the entirety of the book, because if they did, the rest of the movie wouldn't have happened because they wouldn't have been able to resolve it. But their ignorance and naivete are so charming, almost to a fault. It's also a curious thing because Tim Burton, although made this movie, which, yes, it is a horror film, he loves juxtaposing the Halloween theme with other themes and aesthetics. His films are always a blast and have a unique and vivid look to them that you know it's a Tim Burton flick the second the film starts. I know at times some of his movies can feel like they are making fun of themselves, but I don't know, they really are memorable, and there's too much of the good to let some of the lesser things outshine the reputation of his filmography. It's no surprise that one of the biggest highlights of the movie is his monsters and creatures are all made practically with stop motion and special effects. And to be candid, although the stop motion effects were really amazing, the headless running bits always were among my favorites because it always just looked so real, and obviously it helped that they had A-list actors in a movie that feels more like a B-list movie. And that's not a critique in any way, that's more of a merit to its effectiveness. But in conjunction with the amazing effects, the attention to detail is just so amazing. Mainly the waiting room and the afterlife environment, it all just felt so believable and made you go like, yeah, I can see how in this world, this is probably what it would look like. And when it comes to the cast, they are just immaculate. And honestly, everybody puts in all-star performances here. Gina Davis, who just 2 years before had starred in Cronenberg's The Fly, which was fantastic, she was so good here. She was funny and quirky, but also charming and warm. Alec Baldwin, which always shocks me that he doesn't look anything like that anymore, did a solid job at adding to the comedy, and just in general really bounced well off of Barbara, and you can feel the chemistry between the two characters. Like, I'm of the opinion that while these two characters, yes, are simpler and not too complex, I think it works well in a cast full of animated personalities. I just think it grounds the movie where we can feel sympathy for these characters as they go through this odyssey, because at the end of the day, the movie is about death and about having a second chance, or trying to get a second chance chance after that. But Catherine O'Hara and Winona Ryder were just next level. Highly recommend Schitt's Creek because she kind of is always that same character. It just really suits her as she constantly is melodramatic, witty, and has a dry sense of humor but never feels too corny. I just really love her role as Delia Dietz. And of course, Winona Ryder. I mean, she is like a distant relative to Wednesday of how similar she is in attitude, spunk, and just general oddness. But she's also extremely likable, tenacious, and morbidly curious because this whole movie wouldn't work without her, and her performance is just infectious. But above all, Michael Keaton smashed it as Beetlejuice. It's iconic for a reason, whether it's the look, the over-the-top wackiness, or just his random hijinks that lead to what feels like a borderline world-ending problem if the cast weren't to beat him. The guy that played Batman a year after this really proved his versatility from early on in his career. But honestly, one of my personal favorite things about this movie is Beetlejuice's presence transcends this film and is so memorable, yet somehow he's literally in the movie for 15 to 20% of the runtime. And that just shows how much of an impact this character can create with such a little amount of time. Like rewatching this movie, or if you've never seen this movie, you'd think he'd be in the movie for much more than what he actually is in. And honestly, for most of the time that he is in it, he's not really a threat. It's more of just a suggestion that he's gonna be a problem until he actually does become one. And honestly, while he's not in the movie a lot, every second of dialogue and screen time that he has is just gold. He's funny. I love the staging for his interactions with Alec and Gina. It almost looks like they're doing like a sketch walkthrough for some of their interactions. Ultimately, I think one of the best assets of this movie is its open world. Like, so many of these characters are cool and creative, and their unique designs make you think they probably have a fascinating story of how they came to be the way they are. Interpretations in movies like this are what make them timeless and bypass the structural flaws or contradicting nature that they might have. I think having a world like this lets the viewer pick and create a story for the characters that interests them, and that would probably make for a great short film because of how accessible these characters look. Like I said before, this came out in a time where originality and imagination were really running thin, so most likely it was even more successful because it couldn't have come out at a better time. It gave audiences that new taste that they hadn't gotten in so long, especially in the late 80s. In general, I'm really looking forward to Burton's follow-up, and hopefully the charm and tone stay prevalent and faithful. But that'll do it for this one. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe. Sincerely yours, Anthony.